You may have seen someone do this with total drama, but how could we make every non-winning Disventure Camp character win their respective season? Join me today to find out what would happen if Will were meant to be the winner of Disventure Camp Season 1. I'm attempting to do this without changing Will's character entirely, so with that in mind, mostly everything in the first 2 episodes remains the same up until moments before the vote. Will is advocating to eliminate Fiore after she blew up on him. Will is on his side, but Nick is against him, believing Fiore is too young to be so cruel, and wanting to vote him off. The only believable way to keep Will from getting the most votes is for the Alliance to take Ashley's advice and vote for Alec. Ashley explains to them all that the 4 of them are a clear majority, and voting together is crucial at the moment, because if they split off, they're all in danger of elimination from this point forward. Little is on board with this plan, wanting to keep the peace amongst the Alliance. Will still doesn't trust Fiore, but his faith in Ashley overrides his distrust for Fiore, and seeing both of the other 2 agree, Alec decides to do so as well. As to not isolate himself out of the team. With a 4-3 vote, Alec is eliminated. Ellie and Fiore are both upset for strategic reasons, but Alec accepts his fate rather well, considering this is day 1 after all. Will has a closing confessional, swearing he'll find a way to expose Fiore to the others before it's too late. The Alliance is in an interesting place this episode, since there would obviously be conflict between Nick and Will. That aside, Ashley would still be helping Will overcome his many fears. I imagine they start off with something small like maybe frogs. Will obviously has his doubts, but Ashley's comfort pushes him to overcome this small fear, which he is very thankful for. In contrast to this sweet moment, there would be a later scene with Fiore and Will alone. Will obviously tells Fiore he'll make sure everyone finds out who she really is. Fiore doubts this for obvious reasons, and tells him to tread lightly or he'll seal his own fate. When it comes to the challenge, it's a hard guess as to what Will's would be given. He's very paranoid and would have many fears. I decided to just go with something random and common like snakes. He'd have to hold a harmless snake for 5 minutes to pass. Will decides to go through with this, both because of Ashley's encouragement and because he'd want to clear his name from elimination. He successfully does. Marking a moment of development for his character. Also, when Ashley has to do her fear, Will encourages her just as much as she did for him, strengthening their bond. One more thing I want to note is that Ellie makes an effort to befriend Lil. She no longer has Alec, and Fiore is a child, and also at the moment doesn't seem like a good ally. So Ellie needs to find a way to dig herself into the majority alliance to avoid elimination. Nick is Nick, and Will and Ashley are occupied with each other, so Little was the only remaining option. Will was also very open to new bonds as well, so she and Ellie got along pretty well. From that point, the episode pretty much ends the same on Teal Team's part, and Drew is still sent home. Fiore still burns her team's stuff after Little orders her to go. To sleep at night. Upon discovery, Nick immediately blames Will for it. However, when Fiore blames Lil, Nick turns on her instead. Little starts to get a real idea of just how correct Will was about Fiore, and defends herself. When it comes to the challenge, Will and Ashley paddle together. Ellie and Little paddle together, and Fiore is once again left with Nick. Ellie and Little talk about the next vote, with Little advocating to cut Fiore. Ellie tells Little that they should likely go for Nick first, explaining Fiore is still a non-threat at the end of the day, and the longer Nick lasts, the more her alliance crumbles. Little keeps this in mind for future events. Ellie has a confessional revealing she and Fiore connected alliances through the loss of Alec, and she needs to find a way to prevent her from being eliminated. So she's steering Lil's vote away from her. In the second challenge, Will takes Alec's place in fighting against Tom. Although it's closer than Alec v Tom, I still think Tom would win due to having more physical experience being a spy and all. This means the challenge outcome is completely unaffected, and the purple team still lose. Coming down to the vote, Ashley pulls Will and Lil aside, asking to vote for Fiore. Will agrees eagerly, while Lil is more hesitant. Lil has a confessional, admitting she's considering what Ellie told her, and thinks she may be about Nick. Fiore and Ellie meet up discussing the vote. Ellie tells Fiore she managed to turn Lil's vote onto Nick. Fiore then tells her that they need to talk to Nick. Ellie is confused, but Fiore tells her to trust her. At the elimination ceremony, the votes read 1 vote for Nick, 2 for Fiore, and 3 for Lil. Unu would be extremely confused and angry with her team. Will and Ashley admit they're just as confused as she. This is when Lil discovers Ellie eliminated her. She angrily leaves after saying her goodbyes to Ashley and Will, being disappointed by Ellie's betrayal. Ellie has an ending confessional revealing Fiore told her they had to vote with Nick against Lil since if Nick went home, the other 3 would outnumber them again. Lil was the unlucky culprit since Fiore knew if Lil survived and one of the other 2 got eliminated, Lil would target Ellie next. Ellie admits to feeling awful, but says she needs this money. Going into this next episode, there is a big change. Now, I don't have an actual explanation on how to make this happen, but the teal team loses this challenge instead of the purple team. Realistically, I can't see a way in which Will survives this round without heavy plot armor, given Ellie would cut him and Ashley the same way she did Ashley and Lil, so his team has to win for him to survive the upcoming vote. This means due to their deal, Ellie is the one who volunteers to participate in the teal team vote to protect Gabby. Here's where things start getting interesting for the teal team. Next episode, Gret causes tension between Tom and Jake by exposing Tom as a spy, thanks to Drew's notepad. This time, she does it. Here, this turns the 2 against each other, and they vote for each other. I do see Miriam getting the votes on Gret like in canon.so. Imagine that Gret votes Tom, expecting Gabby.to do the same. However, Gabby votes Gret, eliminating her anyways, but it doesn't end there. Gabby holds the power of Ellie's vote as well. With Gret already out of the picture, I imagine Gabby turns the vote onto one of the trio of Miriam, Jake, and Tom. She could literally want any of the 3 gone, so I decided to cut canon winner Miriam to prevent her from floating to the finale. This means Miriam and Gret leave tonight, but at least Miriam bonded with Jake before her departure. I think by this point Will and Ashley have shown to have feelings for each other and are practically on the cusp of becoming an actual couple, which other 3 are dreading. On the contrary, Tom and Jake are regretting their feelings for each other, which Gabby and Dan are thriving with Tom and Jake splitting up. It one single quotes t.be a 2v2. When it comes to the challenge, I imagine Jake and Tom get into another argument about their relationship, which leads to them both getting shot. By Jensen. Meanwhile, Gabby and Dan fly through the challenge together and make it to the end, which Dan lets Gabby take immunity since they're confident no matter what, one of Tom and Jake are going home tonight. With the purple team, Fiore and Ellie grow heavily annoyed with Nick during this challenge. Given he's super lazy and not a team player in the slightest, he gets taken out of the challenge pretty early, and due to the lack of speed, Fiore also fails the challenge. Will and Ashley practically breeze through this challenge, and like Gabby and Dan, they make it to the end together. Ashley gives Will the immunity, since he still has Nick on his neck, and she thinks she might be able to get Nick to vote with her. I feel like these votes are straightforward, so I'm not gonna spend too much time discussing them. Tom and Jake voted each other, and Gabby and Dan voted Tom, meaning he's off the team. And even despite Ashley's efforts and Ellie and Fiore growing annoyed with Nick, Ellie, and Fiore remain in the majority, and Ashley out of the team. Of course, this is a team swap, so neither of them actually have to worry because they're only swapping teams. Ashley on the teal team is basically her bond with Jake in All Stars, but earlier, she'd be pretty friendly with the others too. Meanwhile, Tom on the purple team, he'd start off a little hostile, since the wound of Jake is still fresh. Of course, he's stumbling up on the Will and Nick beef, as well as the Will and Fiore duel. Since Fiore, still acting innocent, Will would attempt to warn Tom of her, which Tom takes lightly, since he has his doubts. When it comes to the challenge, I think those on the wheel remain the same, with Ashley and Jake rotating it for teal team, and Tom and Will rotating .it for purple team. Fiore still breaks Dan's glasses, which ultimately becomes the downfall of the teal team. In this episode, purple team wins immunity. When it comes to the vote, it's an obvious tie. Ashley votes with Jake, and Gabby and Dan vote with each other. However, since Gabby has the idol and would obviously know it's a tie, she'd learn that the other two are targeting Dan and would play her idol on him so that their votes are the only ones that count. So with the 2 votes on Dan canceling out, the only viable votes are the 2 against Jake, eliminating him. He and Ashley have a sweet goodbye, but he still feels immense guilt from the Tom situation. When the teams merge, the couples Ashley and Will, and Gabby and Ellie are happy to be together. Tom would notice Jake's absence and feel immense guilt from how the situation ended. Ashley and Will would try to convince Gabby and Dan to be wary of Fiore and her tactics, but the two aren't convinced. Even Tom still isn't convinced of this, so they keep a close eye on Ashley and Will. When it comes to the challenge, Fiore and Ellie basically do what Fiore and Alec do by getting the questions wrong on purpose and letting everyone else fight each other. The only person outside of this beef would be Tom, since his drama mostly spawned from Jake, and Jake isn't here now. Fiore and Ellie then gang up against Tom to take him out. Ellie also allows Fiore to get immunity, since not only does Ellie have Gabby as a firm ally, but Fiore would obviously have Will and Ashley on her back, so she'd be close to elimination. When it comes to the vote, Will and Ashley would target Nick. Gabby would be all for voting Nick, since he is part of the reason she had to swap teams. However, after going to Ellie, she's informed that Nick must stay at least a little longer as it keeps votes off of everyone else. Ellie sways Gabby to target Ashley instead, since she's also part of the reason Gabby swapped teams, and she isn't in much drama, so she'd slide under the radar. Gabby agrees to this. When it comes down to it, Tom would vote with Ashley and Will against Nick, and Nick would vote for Will, but with the last 4 votes against her, Ashley is eliminated. But things for this episode doesn't end there. Trevor and Derek still expose the voting confessionals, and therefore expose Fiore in the process. Tom, Dan, Gabby, and Nick are finally awakened to the type of person Fiore is, and they apologize to Ashley and Will for not believing them sooner. Isn't forgiven, but the others are, and Ashley and Will have a goodbye kiss before Ashley is sent off. Okay, So I know technically without Alec here, Buddy would know about the VR simulation. But I've always felt as if Dan would as well. At least it gives him some relevance to his character. So for the sake of this video, we'll say Dan knows about the VR simulation. This means after Ellie dies and the players split up, Dan assures Gabby that Ellie isn't actually dead, because it's a VR simulation, but Fiore ends up in earshot of this and forms a plan. Now, this challenge honestly isn't one I want to go into too much detail for, so long story short, Will and Nick kill each other. Tom takes out Dan, Gabby takes out Tom, and Fiore takes out Gabby, winning immunity. When it comes to the vote, Ellie talks to Gabby and Dan about the vote, and the three agree on the same person. Meanwhile, Tom is met up by Will, and they also share a similar target. Even though Fiore and Nick vote for Will, everyone else votes for Nick, finally eliminating him. Nick leaves bitterly. Fiore is upset with Ellie, and everyone else is in peace. This episode would start with Will being satisfied with the current status of his game. Fiore approaches him, wondering why, and he'd tell her now that she's exposed, it's only a matter of time before everyone voted her off. Fiore would say he's still as simple-minded as before, and explains that with the Gabby, Ellie, Dan trio, if they were to eliminate her right now, he and Tom are practically guaranteed 5th and 4th place. They're gonna need her to cause a tie at minimum, and a potential blindside at max. Will realizes this and hesitates to make an actual decision. When it comes to the challenge, Tom still finds the idol when he gets to the bridge, and when Ellie drops her medals, Gabby gives her own to Ellie, so Ellie still wins immunity for this challenge. After the challenge, Will takes Tom with him to talk to Fiore, and he tells Fiore, after thinking a little more, and seeing the bonds of the other three, he's decided to take her up on her offer. Tom is against this at first, but when Will puts into perspective the situation, he also agrees. The initial plan is to cause a tie between Fiore and Dan, since Dan would be easiest to beat, but then, Tom pulls Will aside in private to show him the immunity idol, saying they could likely eliminate Fiore now and still make the final 4 together. Will wants this plan and agrees to it, but Fiore overhears this and forms a new plan instead. She is able to convince Gabby, Ellie, and Dan to target Tom, partially because she technically still has an alliance with Ellie, and partially because Tom is a bigger threat than Will and Fiore anyway, especially since it's now common knowledge that he is or was a spy. The vote comes, and it's 1 vote for Dan by Fiore, 2 votes for Fiore by Tom and Will, and 3 votes for Tom by Gabby, Dan, and Ellie. Tom and Will would not be upset and confused by how the dominating trio didn't vote for Fiore. Dan explains she just isn't a big threat, which Tom is even more upset with. He tries playing his idol, but is reminded by how it can only be played before the votes are read. Tom angrily storms off to the bus stop, but before he leaves, Trevor approaches him, telling him he can gift his idol to a remaining player in the game, and to choose wisely. It's obvious who's getting the idol this episode, both from the premise of this video and the bond he made with Tom over the course of the season. There really isn't much to say about this challenge. Actually, Will and Fiore get the batteries and are forced to work with the trio. There's a lot of betrayal and backstabbing because of this. Fiore out of pure malice, and Will for survival purposes. It ends with Will getting immunity, and Fiore extremely worried. When it comes to the vote, Fiore hard bargains for Ellie to cut Dan over her. Meanwhile, Gabby and Dan are expecting to vote Fiore tonight. Ellie ultimately wants to respect Gabby's wishes, and she turns on Fiore. Fiore goes to Will and begs for him to do something. Will is hesitant because he doesn't know if he can trust Fiore's tears, given earlier in the season they were fake. But given it's gonna be him against a trio anyways, and he'd much rather better his chances of survival by any means necessary, he does what he never thought he'd ever want to do. He tells Fiore she must vote his way if she wants to be saved tonight. Fiore agrees, and the vote ends with a score of 3-2. Will plays his immunity idol on Fiore, meaning only their votes count. With 2 votes to her name, Gabby is the eliminated player. The others are shocked by Will having the idol, but of course, this was obviously Tom's doing. Gabby says goodbye to her friends and even has her goodbye kiss with Ellie before leaving. Will has an ending confessional, saying he never thought he'd be doing this, but right now, he has to work with Fiore if he wants to win. The pairs are Will and Fiore against Ellie and Dan, meaning no matter which pair wins, they'll agree on the elimination. When it comes down to the average challenge performance, I see Dan and Ellie doing better, although it's much closer than you think. When it comes down to the intermission between challenges, Will and Fiore make the same deal to Ellie that Miriam and Ellie do to Fiore and Cannon, and Ellie sabotages herself and Dan to lose against Fiore and Will. Ellie expects them to cut Dan like promised, but is shocked to hear both of them agree on eliminating her. Fiore explains in a confessional that Ellie is too smart for her own good and had to be cut before the finale. Also, this is payback for attempting to eliminate her last episode. Ellie angrily leaves, and the finale is Will, Dan, and Fiore. Those in green are on Team Will, those in yellow are on Team Fiore, and those in purple are on Team Dan. Sure, most of these are obvious as to why someone chose who they chose, but I'll explain the ones that might cause confusion. Gret doesn't have anything against Will, but I still think she'd choose Fiore over him. From what she's seen of him, Drew was pretty limited on options, but he and Dan had a positive relationship from what I could gather from the show. And with Jake, he has resentment for Dan due to him being voted off by Dan, and the only reason he doesn't side with Will because he's still upset with Tom, and Will and Tom are friends. So that's a link Jake wouldn't want to deal with. When it comes to the helpers, Dan gets Gabby, Will, Ashley, and Fiore gets Alec. With that being said, I don't think I have to explain how Will wins here. Dan and Will get outsmarted by Alec and Fiore, and in a foot race situation, Will beats Dan, and in the end, I see Ashley basically doing what Tom did, as revenge for Fiore eliminating her. Fiore's cart blows up, and Will crosses the finish line, winning the season. That's the end of this episode. What are your thoughts? Personally, I like how this turned out, although I do have a few complaints. I wasn't really able to give Jake a proper ending, which is kinda sad given his canon ending for this season was already bad. He was probably the hardest to maintain during this theory, so I hope I at least made him interesting here. I also kinda had Dan float throughout the entire game into the finale, which is a little disappointing. I had pretty much nothing to go off of for him since the show already did pretty much nothing with him, but I couldn't find a place to properly eliminate him either. So he kinda just patched onto the show until the end. When I get to his episode, I'm gonna try not to have him float and actually make him relevant to the main story. I enjoyed giving Will a moral dilemma when it came to working with Fiore near the end, rather than against. It gives him a little extra flavor to his character rather than keeping him one note like in canon. But yeah, I had fun making this, and I hope you enjoyed watching it. Make sure to like and subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next one.